Hi folks, I'm interviewing Richard Braine, who's the chairman of the West London UKIP branch. Richard, how are you doing?
Very well, very good to see you. Thanks for coming, Carl.
Oh, my pleasure. Right, well, I suppose we should start at the beginning. The new future for UKIP. What do you think we should do?
Yes, I actually think UKIP is on a great course at the moment, and I think there's a lot of optimism in the party amongst the real, the hardcore members, the people that are when you cut them in half, it says UKIP through the middle, and I think those people are excited about it. And I mean, you are, as you probably know, part of that excitement. There's been a real excitement over younger people joining, over people joining who want to get the word out on social media and on the internet. And so it's been a great compliment to, people always said, oh, UKIP's, full of old people. Well, of course, that constitutes a vast amount of wisdom. It's very important to remember. Old people have had a lot longer to look at the world and learn about the world. But it's very exciting to have youngsters on board as well. And it's fantastic. I understand that UKIP's the second most popular party amongst the 18 to 24 age group, according to a Survation poll, which is very exciting. And I think one of the contributing factors there is that for a lot of young people, the love that dare not speak its name is patriotism and belief in their country. And I think there's young people out there who've never been allowed to say UKIP over the kitchen table at home because their parents are so, perhaps not fanatically, but certainly very antipathetic towards UKIP. And so there's a certain amount of rebellion. I think that ties in with the spirit of UKIP. UKIP, from its inception, was about saying the unsayable. Yeah. It was about talking about the possibility of leaving the European Union when that was a very, perhaps not a dangerous topic, but certainly something that people were not too keen to talk about.
It was fringe, wasn't it?
It was fringe, yeah. And so UKIP has its roots in being, a slightly revolutionary party, but certainly a revolutionary party to some extent back in those days and later that was had more emphasis on older people, because older people could remember what it was like before the European Union and recognize that the European Union hadn't really solved very many problems, that economically the UK was actually doing quite well before we joined. We weren't doing badly. We had, I think the GDP per capita growth before we joined the EEC was 2.9% per annum on average. When we joined, that has actually sunk to 1.7% per annum. So I think many of the old timers could remember a time when it was a little bit easier to get a job, get paid, have enough money to maybe rent a flat or put some money down on buying your own place. Those were better and easier times. So it's fantastic. And during the campaign recently, I was with a chap called Eric, who's the London chairman of Young Independents. And after an interview that I did on the BBC, we went for a quick half pint of shandy at the pub, and Eric took a picture of myself and him, a selfie, and posted it. We posted it with the tag Boomer Millennium Alliance. And I love that. Boomers are the baby boomer generation, so people born in the 60s and before, and the millennials we all know. And so it was a great sort of meeting of minds across bridging, almost really a skipped generation, I suppose. And we need to make sure that bridge is very well built and can take a lot of traffic, so that we all come together with this goal that we have in the party of returning to a more democratic and a freer country, and a country where people can discuss things that often these days don't get discussed. Yeah,
I think that is one of the major contributing factors to UKIP's popularity among younger people, is the fact that we're very firm on free speech. And none of the other parties are. In fact, I would suggest that they are actually complicit with the censorship. So I can totally see why young people are looking and thinking, well, it's my freedom, it's my future. Where am I going to go? But so I don't actually want to talk about Brexit, because I think Brexit at the moment I'm actually quite optimistic about it. I actually think that the Conservatives can see the writing on the wall and realise that Nigel Farage is going to do various horrible, unspeakable things to them if they don't just do it.
So you don't think that we're going to have a fake Tory Brexit 2? Theresa May's fake Brexit being version 1. You don't think that we're being lined up for a different version of not leaving?
No, I think that it'd be the end of the Tories if they do that. I think, and I think they're aware. I mean, Boris Johnson has been saying as much for the past few weeks. I think that they're just going to shove him in and just let him do it. But I could be completely wrong because, never make predictions. But so after Brexit, assuming we get the Brexit that we need, what do you think we should do? Where do you think UKIP goes from there?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think we need to do is continue as we've been going. We've got obviously a lot of bad press recently, and people saying, "Oh, UKIP only got 3.5% or whatever it was in this European election." It's important to recognise why we only got 3.5%, which is that the leading party in that election was a party that named itself after UKIP's number one policy that it's been fighting for 27 years. It's a party that certainly we know many UKIPers voted for it in that election. It doesn't mean to say that they always will.
And it's led by Mr. Brexit as well.
That's right. That's right. So we have to see that as a success. We need to be pleased that our policy that we've been fighting for so long, which we think is a kind of umbrella policy that actually has a huge influence on almost every aspect of British politics, hopefully is going to be dealt with. And I sincerely hope that your optimism is well placed. And I'll certainly be thrilled if we really do come out of the EU, and I'll be celebrating massively.
I could be eating these words in a few months' time.
Yeah. I've been voting for that really my whole adult life. Since I was a teenager, I identified that the EU could only achieve its goals, which it's usually very honest about, could only achieve them by oppressing and controlling the countries of Europe, where you have the greatest diversity of culture, language, history, peoples, probably of almost anywhere in the world. Yep. So that diversity is the real spirit of Europe, and the EU, unfortunately, seems to be keen on what has been termed homogeneity, to some extent stamping out that diversity. But UKIP has got a lot more in its manifesto than just Brexit, and certainly, as you say, free speech is a big issue. I think that I mentioned this before, but Labour obviously traditionally has been bound up with the unions, and that's where the funding has come from. But in many ways, that whole history is a history of trying to wage a kind of Marxist war between the worker and the person or the management or the company that employs the worker. And that caused an enormous damage to Britain in the post-war era, and even before the war. And so I think we need to be thankful that the unions don't have as much power as they did back in the dark days of the 70s. So that's Labour, but it still seems to have that connection. You've still got Len McCluskey and so on, very powerful in the Labour movement, and of course Jeremy Corbyn, a real old school Marxist, frankly. So the Corbyn's Labour is a sort of throwback to the bad days when Labour and the often militant Marxist union movement in Britain was doing great damage to us, and we must not go back there. You look at the Tories, and they are funded, increasingly by international big business. They always had a connection with big business, but back in the old days, going back to when I was a child and earlier, it was very often British businesses that had that kind of influence over our politics. Increasingly, of course, those corporations that have that sort of influence are not British. No. And so it means that the Tories, to a great extent, significant extent, actually serve, to some extent, foreign concerns rather than the British people themselves, which is a worry. And I think many decisions have been made that have proved to be not very sympathetic towards British workers, British small businesses, and British people generally. So the Tory party, I don't think, can help us because their outlook on our politics is too partisan. Yep. UKIP is actually somewhere in the middle. It's quite a moderate party on these questions, and I think that UKIP appeals to people who think for themselves. Yes. So I think it appeals to small businesses, entrepreneurs, people who are artisans and workers of all kinds. We see obviously this big growth in what they call 0 hours contracts. A lot of people who work under 0 hours contracts do so because they want to. They do so because it gives them the freedom to work when they want to, when they need to. And that's a very, very important freedom. And in this very fast-moving world that we have now, with technology changing so rapidly, that agility, that freedom to change your business, to change your skills, to skill up and do new things is very important. And I think there's an awful lot of able people in this country who work for small businesses. One of the worst things for those small businesses is the excessive levels of regulation, difficult levels of the legal requirement just to set up a business and stay within the law as a business these days is harder than ever. So that's a problem that we hope leaving the EU will solve, because hopefully the people of Britain will elect governments who understand this and make life easier for smaller businesses and not the big lobbying groups, so that smaller businesses can really thrive. And smaller businesses are absolutely key to our economy. They're very underrated because they're small, but they altogether, in aggregate, form a huge part of our economy.
Well, they do. Something like 53% of Britain's businesses are small businesses. We actually are still a nation of shopkeepers, as Napoleon described us. And I love the idea that that's meant to be a pejorative term as well. To me, that's a wonderful endorsement of the sort of British entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
The fact that we work for ourselves for the most part. So I'm most interested in not the Conservatives. I think that the Brexit Party chaps have got the Conservatives firmly under wraps in this regard. I'm more concerned about Labour. I really am, because it's understandable that when you've got a party of big business and the landed aristocracy, that you're going to need a kind of class counterweight. And it's a natural place for the Marxists to go to recruit. I think it is a necessary thing that some party does exist to support the regular working person of the country.
Yeah.
And I think it's obvious at this point that's not the Labour Party.
Yeah.
So I think UKIP has a good future in going to those places where Labour has become corrupt and start rooting them out. But this is going to cause quite some controversy.
Yes.
What do you think we should do?
Well, I think that's right. And, we've seen the betrayal of large numbers of British people. I think actually, to some extent, it goes back to a fairly old-fashioned culture of class conflict. I say old-fashioned. It's only really probably in the last 150 years that class has been such a source of conflict. If you see the way
since Marx put out the manifesto.
Well, that's it exactly, and since the idea was introduced that you should go to war over this, and I think that the story that often isn't told is that the success of Britain in over the last 300 or 400 years actually, to a great extent, was built on a real symbiosis, an understanding of people who owned and ran businesses, that they had social obligations towards those people that worked for them. Quite often in the old days, those people would actually be housed and would be living on the estates of the people that they worked for. And there's some great examples of...
Cadbury's is a really good example of that, isn't it? I actually went to their Cadbury's factory, and they take you around on tour, and you get to see about the Cadbury's village and all this sort of thing. But sorry, anyway...
Well, and that's absolutely right. And you look at, we have these traditions like, for instance, John Lewis Partnership and the Co-op, and those are more modern sort of 20th century examples. But, there were coal mining estates where, the entire workforce was, educating their children in schools built by the bosses. And you mentioned Cadbury's. Obviously, Christianity was pretty key in that as well, because Cadbury's, as I understand it, was a Methodist. I think the founders were Methodists.
Certainly, I don't recall them mentioning that in the talk.
I think that certainly for many of these businesses that did operate with a social conscience, they were quite often quite heavily Christian of one flavour or another, and so that certainly informed their sense of community and obligation towards their workers. But the key thing, of course, is making sure that there are enough jobs for people at that the lower paid end of the spectrum, so that those people don't fear losing their jobs. They know that there's a strong likelihood that they're going to be employed, and that even if their current job they leave it or it becomes untenable for one reason or another, that there's opportunity for them outside that. To some extent, that's what went wrong in the 80s. That many people who had, let's say, minded coal mines their whole lives, many of them did go on to do other things afterwards, but a lot of them didn't. Were never able to find gainful employment. afterwards. It's very important to have that environment where it's easy for people to set up businesses. One of the things that I think is very important about this is that it needs to be very, very easy to sack people. Because if it's easy to sack people, then it means as a business trying to grow a small business, you don't think twice about hiring someone new. So let's give this guy a chance. And he might work for you for 3 months. Of course, apprenticeships were much bigger back then as well. And it was about giving people opportunity, letting them prove themselves, letting them learn on the job, and making sure that of course had an influence on wages. One of the problems with the sort of no borders, the freedom of movement issue with the European Union is that British workers have been having to compete for jobs with very large numbers of people who've come from, let's say, the former Eastern Bloc countries, and in fact all over Europe. And the result is that they've had wage compression, and they get paid less, and it's hard to live, and they become more dependent on on the state and welfare and all those things. We've got so many people employed today on the what's it called, tax credit system, where you've got the state really funding firms to hire people, realistically paying them less than minimum wage, and the state filling in the gap. Again, that's not ideal, and that's also probably a direct result of the very, very large competition, labour competition. So in many ways, becoming an independent nation, a self-governing nation, and a nation that properly polices its borders and who can work here, that I think is likely to be one of the biggest changes that will bring about a better situation for the people on the lowest wages. And that includes, don't forget, most importantly, immigrants who've already come to this country, many of whom are on the bottom rung of the ladder and will really benefit from that change. So I think that by avoiding the conflict between workers and management, and by avoiding the Tory connection with firms that are really just interested in seeking profit in a sort of, and they think of people as sort of, locusts, and we can move on to the next place in the world once we've ravaged this place. Getting rid of those two errors, those two philosophies of labour, will actually bring about a great change for workers generally and people on low wages.
Yeah, so there's a very interesting case study in the Brexit referendum itself, because the fact that we voted for Brexit meant that somewhere around the region of 130,000 people from Eastern Europe decided to voluntarily leave the country. And in the towns that this happened in, there's been a noticeable rise in employment, in wages, and in a general kind of optimism for the future, because they suddenly don't feel like they're under a massive amount of competition for jobs. And effectively what we're doing is we're suggesting we turn the labour market into a seller's market rather than a buyer's market, because at the moment when you have open borders, it is a buyer's market. If you're hiring, well, you're going to be able to get the most for the least. And that's really not very fair to the people who have nowhere else to go, is it?
My parents-in-law went down to, I think they did a little trip in Sicily 6 months or a year ago. And one of the things that they remarked on traveling around villages in Sicily and that part of the world was how, there aren't many young people, and the villages and towns are quite deserted. And I think that we've seen a lot of people from Southern Europe where the euro has made the currency too hard to make businesses effective, flee north. And they've come to Germany, they've come to the UK, they've come to France, and they've gone for opportunity. And living here in central London as I do, I see a lot more through my daily life these days. I see a lot more people from Europe than I do, English people. We're now a minority in this city, and it's interesting because I sometimes have conversations with French, German, Spanish, Italian, Greek people from all over Europe, and one of the things that I point out to them is because many of them have quite worthwhile jobs in the city or in financial services or in London generally, where you've got a very strong professional labour market, and the reality is that many of them have come here for the opportunity. And one of the reasons why there's more opportunity for them here is because we kept the pound, and because that gave us a little bit more control, a bit more agility in our in our economy and in the government of our economy. And that's a reason why they're essentially refugees from the lack of opportunity in mainland European countries, many of them. They've come here because there's work for them here. And there just isn't enough work for them in those countries. The EU has a lot to answer for in that regard. It has not been the great economic utopia that we're always supposed to pretend it is. It's actually been, I think, quite damaging to the European economy compared to where it would have been if countries had had the freedom to continue with their own currencies, to adjust their economies appropriately for their geography, for their demographics, and for the global market that they have to operate in. So by centralizing and to some extent applying a one-size-fits-all economic range of policies, bureaucratizing the European economies, great damage has been wrought. And I was really thrilled to see that Italy is just looking at an alternative currency now with is it Minibot? I think is it called Minibot?
I don't know the name of it, but I saw the news that they're.
But that's the beginning of the fight back. That's the beginning of countries being able to start to take back a bit of control of their economies and adjust accordingly for the benefit of their own peoples. If you combine that with real democracy, the aggregation of people's wants and needs in self-interest, then those countries can actually start to emerge from the rather depressing place that they are in at the moment. And even Germany, is in something of a depressing place at the moment. So hopefully, what I would love to see is those more countries in Europe start to issue their own alternative currencies, and those currencies to be enormously successful. And those currencies start to rebuild their economies as people in those countries discover that you can export goods if the price is right, and that the world does want to buy your excellent products, whatever they may be, if the price is right.
But what you're suggesting there is essentially an unraveling of the European project.
Yes, I am, and I think even when I was a teenager, thinking about these things, the concept for me of the European Union was essentially, like a Tower of Babel, that it was a hopeless effort to build some great cathedral of uniformity, a monolithic structure. We know from the Soviet Union that it didn't work very well there to have a centralized bureaucracy trying to run this huge empire. And structurally, when you think of the extraordinary explosion of the internet itself, one of the key things about the internet and the reason that it became so popular so quickly is that it was a network. It was a network that enabled, the communication between everyone. But it didn't really have much of a kind of top-down pyramidal structure. It was a peer-to-peer system. And I think that's my concept of a world of nations, where, those nations, if they govern themselves properly in enlightened self-interest, and they play ball and they get on with the rest of the world and they specialize in what they are good at and what their geography and what their people and what their culture can provide, then actually there can be a very prosperous future. So I really see a model for the world as a patchwork of nations, more of a sort of coral reef than a sort of military style hierarchy where you have some kind of self-appointed or oligarch appointed god at the top who issues diktats and decrees and what do they call them, directives, and everybody lower down has to comply, and there isn't enough feedback from the grassroots up to the top of the structure for it to be properly reflective of what people want in aggregate.
I agree. I think that's the eternal problem with this kind of centralization. And I really agree with you on this. I look at things and think, well, it's not like giant empires are a new invention. And it's always been the same problem, is communication and the issues of a lack of understanding of the reality on the ground by the few at the top. And this has always been a problem in every empire. And so it should come as no surprise that it's exactly the same problem with the European Union.
That's right. And I think it's interesting to look at the concept of, a one world empire, and try to think about why perhaps you certainly, I have the instinct that kind of project is, if not doomed, at least far from optimal.
It seems vainglorious to me.
The thing that worries me is what I think the reason why that kind of structure doesn't work is that the primary reason is that the human frailties take over. So once you have established your perfect pyramid of hierarchy, a one world empire, then the people, the higher up people are in that institution, and the longer time goes on, the more their sloth. I mean, sloth is a natural human inclination. All of us are fighting the battle of energy with nature and trying to make the best of life in a essentially a more or less hostile world, one way or another. Of course, a world that gives us enormous gifts, but on the other hand, in the end, as the management consultant McKinsey, wasn't it, who said, in the long run, we're all dead, and in the end, we are all going to lose the battle against nature. I don't think of the sloth that builds up and the inefficiency that builds up and the territorialism that builds up in big organizations like that as that we should point the fingers at the people responsible for that. It is simply a natural human reaction to being comfortable, to being in power, to having everything your way, to having nothing to worry about, to put your feet up on a nice plush velvet cushion and sit back and enjoy, the privilege of the pyramid because you're somewhere nearer the top of the pyramid, and that's the temptation. That temptation is always there. So big organizations like that. And you see it, of course, even in smaller companies. So look at any decent-sized company, and already you see the territorialism. You see people pretending to do a lot of hard work on the tandem, but they're at the back of the tandem and they put their feet up while other people start pedaling. The natural inclination to achieve some rest is always there, pulling us back. And so I think that's very often why big organizations like that, which are unchallenged, that's what's wrong with monopolies, is that they sort of atrophy, they solidify, and they become static instead of dynamic. They
always forget their purpose as well. They kind of calcify, don't they? The institution becomes the great good rather than the good that the institution did. The Catholic Church is the best example of this, where accretions build up until someone just points out that, hey, none of this is in the Bible. Yeah. And suddenly the whole thing's been rendered invalid.
I would say, I'm not sure the Catholic Church is the best example of that, because what people forget is that for probably 20 years, I'm not talking about the Catholic Church, I'm just talking about the church as it was left by Christ. He didn't leave a book.
Well, no.
So for a period, the apostolic succession,
for a very brief window, 2,000 years ago,
the church that Christ built was actually a group of people committed to a cause. Of course, that accretion does build up, but as you rightly say, there's plenty of examples of that in the church. But you also see it in almost every large. To be honest, you see it in political parties as well.
Absolutely.
And we see it to some extent in UKIP. Perhaps UKIP is still a relatively new and smaller party, so the situation isn't as bad as it may be in some other parties. But you look at the Soviet Party, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and
So you're talking about Labour then?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, not far.
No real difference.
Not far. Yeah. But yes, so it happens, and the bigger the institution, the longer it's been around, the more that tends to happen. And you need to try to introduce. I mean, that's one of the reasons why competition is so important, because it cuts out the fat. You've got to get up off your arse and do something, and you've got to get out there and compete, and that's what it's all about. So there can be none of that sort of competition with a one world government, and I think it will inevitably will become an ineffective structure of government.
There's no question of it. And the thing is, the eternal question always asks is, well, who would you put in charge of it? And I mean,
Tony Blair.
Exactly. Well, Guy Verhofstadt, Jean-Claude Juncker.
Yeah.
I mean, are we happy with these people controlling Europe? I wouldn't be happy with these people controlling a pub.
Yeah.
Let alone a continent. And then they've got great idealistic visions. It's like, yeah, okay, but they're very, very, very far away from the people who have to live with the consequences of their decisions.
Yeah.
They're very insulated from these things, and they always will be until the structure collapses, when the angry mob in Brussels, for instance, attacks the Commission building.
Yeah.
When that sort of thing starts happening, you've got to realise that the path you've been on is dramatically different to the one you planned. Because surely your plans didn't involve Belgian yellow vests attacking your building.
That's it. But there's also one of the other factors there, of course, is sycophancy. See, once the bigger the structure gets and the more powerful people get, the more inevitably they end up surrounded by yes men, who mostly are motivated. Or often are motivated by self-advancement, which is perfectly rational, but that encourages people to flatter and deceive and go along with things that somewhere they may have a niggle of conscience that says maybe this isn't the way things should be run. But people don't whistle, but they don't call it out and say, this is. Are we really sure we want to go in this direction?
If it strikes me that this kind of loops back round to why it's a good thing to be a nation of shopkeepers.
Absolutely, it's a cultural. It's a cultural sort of. What's the word I'm looking for? I think the point there is that there's a very healthy attitude towards power by ordinary people. That's the goal. Is that ordinary people have a deep skepticism towards those who rule over them. They demand of those people that they perform and that they provide real value and do the job well. And I think Brexit is a case in point here that over 40 years or so, many of the people who voted to leave have witnessed a failure in government to take their concerns seriously in so many hundreds of different ways, and that was one of the driving factors of Brexit, a sense that we needed. That's why I think the slogan "Take Back Control" was actually very well judged, because it was actually about the man in the street, the woman in the street, taking back control of government and of those who make our laws, and that was absolutely vital. And it's a very important turn for the UK to have made, and to show an example to the world that there comes a point when you actually have to listen to the people. And I hope that we are going to see in the near future government actually do that and actually deliver what we voted for.
So when it comes to the reasons that people voted to leave, the breakdown of it seemed to be that the South generally voted for sovereignty, so they're voting in principle, which I think is eminently respectable. But I felt that a lot of people in the North, and after having gone up to some of these places with the sort of northern tour that we did, and speaking to these people, I feel that a lot of them felt that there was no light at the end of the tunnel. They felt that whatever path they were on now wasn't... they didn't see any way it was going to end in a way that they found favourable. And so I think they were just voting for change rather than voting for any particular thing. And I think that this sort of ties into what you were saying a minute ago about the sort of spirit of revolution that UKIP's always had. What do you make of all that?
I half agree with it. I mean, the spirit of revolution certainly is there. And I think, UKIP is a party where I went in 2017. I went to the UKIP conference, and as usual, everyone's chattering away. People go up to each other. They talk about politics. They talk about whatever's on their mind. But I actually went the next day. I went up to Manchester because I'd printed out some leaflets that I wanted to give to Tory members, because the Tory conference directly followed the UKIP conference,
right.
And I wanted to give out a leaflet that said transition to Corbyn, because I thought that the Tory party was taking the transition that they kept talking about wasn't the one that was really going to happen. And it was very interesting because I couldn't get into a fringe event. I couldn't get into anything very much because the security was insane. But when I came down in the lift from this fringe event, I think there were about 5 or 6 of us in the lift. And I noticed we had 7 floors to go down. And as soon as everyone went into the lift, there was silence. No one looked at each other, and people started taking their phones out, and there was no conversation. and I was slightly shocked by it because 24 hours earlier I had been at UKIP conference, where if 6 people at UKIP conference got into a lift together, then there's going to be serious discourse, and it's going to be fun, and people are going to say interesting things and discuss all kinds of things, and there will be agreement and disagreement and all of that, and it's all done in the right nature of discourse. And that seemed, it was just very strange the way it seemed to be so absent at the Tory conference. The reason why I say that is that UKIP does have a party culture, and I agree with you that it is rebellious, and it goes. I think it's the spirit of punk and the spirit of the ancient Kinnic philosophers. They were Kinnic, coming from kinos, meaning dog, because they behaved shamelessly in public, and they suggested outlandish ideas like leaving a union or whatever it might be, and they wanted to hold up a mirror to society and say, you've become wrapped up in yourselves. You need to see things more clearly and start thinking from first principles, and challenge, the artifice of a sophisticated political society. And Diogenes famously was sitting naked in the Stoa, as he did with his long beard, and talking. And some chap said to him, "You've pleased me. I grant you a wish. I'm Alexander, emperor of the known world." And Diogenes said, "Oh, thank you. Could you move to the left a bit, because you're in the sunshine. You're getting in the way of the sunshine." And that, I do think that spirit, comes right through thousands of years. That rebellious spirit, the spirit of speaking truth, unwelcome truth, very often to power, right through to the punks. I mean, the Sex Pistols were formed only a few hundred yards from where we're sitting now, and it's notable that Johnny Rotten was one of few people that spoke out, for instance, about Jimmy Savile in one of his recordings, which you can find on YouTube, and he was one of the few people that mentioned it and was prepared to say anything about it, because lots of people knew what was going on. So that courage to shame yourself by saying the unsayable thing is a deep thing in UKIP, I think. Almost every member I've met has, to some degree, that kind of courage. So yes, coming back to the issue of voters in the North wanting to, flick 2 fingers at power at Westminster and say, look, you've been ignoring us. You haven't let us vote on this matter for 40 years, and this is our chance to tell you you actually should listen to us. I think that is a factor, but there's another factor there. The reason why I say that's half the issue, because I do think that one of the big reasons why people, especially in the north of the UK, voted for to leave the European Union is actually simply good economic common sense. Those people are facing stronger competition for work, and that's depressing their wages, and they see that all the time from the EU. So they're worse off. Because of that, they have lower wages. They're also worse off because the large influx of people is putting pressure on all of the services that they would, otherwise hope to have access to, including schooling, housing, hospitals, doctors, even, the road system. I mean, everything, gyms even. Pressure's being put on all of those things, and they're getting more expensive because of the demand. And so that's making them poorer too. And so that's 2 ways they're getting poorer. I think also the third way that those people have been made greatly poorer, especially in the north, I'm talking about people who are on lower wages and who do struggle to get by, is that they've been forced very often to buy more expensive products than they otherwise might because of the common external tariff. So being inside the European Union almost certainly makes the prices of a lot of basic everyday goods that people really depend on to live, not luxury goods, not Veblen goods, but the real bread and butter stuff. Those things actually have become more expensive because of the European Union. So that's 3 ways that that people, not just in the north, but all over this country, have been economically diminished by being a member of the European Union. So I think that that there was a sound economic decision made in the vote to leave, that economists and theorists in their ivory towers in London and Oxford and fancy universities all over the place don't really grasp. It's too nuts and bolts, and they've not been thinking about what it's like to worry about whether you can afford milk for your children, and whether you can afford to buy an extra loaf of bread or not, and whether you can afford to pay parking fines. So it's not just rebellion. It was also, I think, strongly a correct economic decision to try to make themselves a little bit better off. And have a slightly better life. And absolutely rational, a profound economic judgment made by large numbers of people. And economists hate that ordinary people,
How very dare they?
But don't forget that ordinary people have to decide, how much they're going to pay for goods. They have to decide what they can afford. They have to pay their bills. They have to go to work. They have to try and earn a living. They have to try and get by in this world. And so people are very, very economically astute. And sometimes economists are not. And, famously, 364 economists wrote to the Times before Margaret Thatcher's reforms, saying that she was going to bankrupt the country. And, of course, the opposite happened, which is that she produced a real improvement in opportunity and in income, albeit not for some of the people who were victims. Let's say, look at the miners and so on, but by and large, across the country, wealth was generated, and those radical economic decisions turned out to be good decisions, even though most of the economists said don't do it. I think that the Project Fear situation is quite similar. We were told over and over.
Look at what the Bank of England was saying. Just the very vote would destroy the economy.
There you go. And they've been trying hard for 3 years to produce the downturn
it's going up.
that they're so eager to see, so that they can be proved right and pat themselves on the back. As Jacob Rees-Mogg said, it's like when Mark Carney was talking down the pound, he said it's unprecedented for the governor of the Bank of England to advise people to short the pound. And we've seen much too much of that. We need to recognise that the promised economic disaster of voting to leave has not materialised, that the UK is doing well. And just as we were told that we would be finished if we didn't join the euro, and it turned out to be the opposite of the truth, I think we need to take what we're told by economists and experts on finance with a real pinch of salt.
But they're the experts. How can you say that? They know what they're talking about.
Economics is a pseudoscience, and every company wants a one-armed economist, so that when he says, on the one hand, this could happen, he'll just shut up there and they know what to do, instead of on the other hand, because hedging their bets is the name of the game in economics.
It is genuinely remarkable just how wrong they were, though. I can't get over it. Wages are going to drop. People are going to find themselves unemployed. Businesses won't invest here. And it's the complete opposite. We get more investment than France and Germany, which was reported this week. Wages are up 3.5% a week.
Yeah.
Unemployment lowest since 1975.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems that Brexit's really going very well for the regular person in the country, but it's not going very well for the commuting class, the sort of middle class corporate worker who was very invested in a European project. They're a proud European, and they're very angry that the working classes of the North are doing quite well now.
I don't.
Probably not in those terms.
I'm not sure that the reasonably well off are doing that badly. Actually, I think often in these situations, it's not a zero-sum game, and everybody's doing okay.
Well, it's for the reason you said. It's they've been proven wrong.
Yeah,
because they spent the year before saying, no, you're all useless. We're all going to die. Europe's going to save us. It's all going to be terrible.
That's it.
And it turns out that's not true.
Yeah. There has not been a need for a punishment budget as we were promised by Osborne.
Yeah.
And I'm really very optimistic about what will happen if we're really allowed to leave, because I'm convinced that freedom and democracy are generally very good for business.
That's a far right opinion.
Businesses love freedom. Businesses want to get on.
No. It needs to be centrally managed from the top. And
that's it. Businesses want to exploit opportunities, and they will go and find those opportunities. You don't even have to legislate for it. They just do it. And we need to trust our businesses and have a real confidence in British workers and British businesses and British people to find that opportunity all around the world and make a success of it.
That's what it comes down to, though, isn't it? It's a fundamental lack of confidence in the people of this country. And I really can't stand it. I think it's been always the same. Because, I mean, I've been reading a lot of Orwell's stuff that's not 1984. And I read his notes on nationalism. And it sounds very much the same as it was then. You know, we've got the kind of, and he described them as Anglophobic, sort of intelligentsia, the Twitterati we would call them now, who think that there's nothing redeemable about this country and that we can't stand on our own. And it's just genuinely sad. But so I do.
Can I just say on that? There's an interesting point here, which is I do think that. My view is that Britain is one of the most racist countries in the world, but the racism that you experience most often in the UK actually is basically white British middle class people expressing negative attitudes and to some extent hatred towards Britain and the British, and especially the British working class. And you know, we see this all the time. You can advertise a job in this country, as London Transport and BBC and lots of other organisations have. Say BAME applicants only. You know, that is just simply racist.
It's unthinkable.
It is simply racist, and yet it's perfectly acceptable to most people, and no one blinks an eye at it. And you know, how did we get to the point where, as a country, it's perfectly legal and reasonable to discriminate against, you know, the indigenous people of this country in job applications? You know, that's madness.
I wouldn't accept it if it was, you know, white people only. I'm not going to accept it if it's black people only. The procedure is wrong, and it's, you know, wrong in principle. I'm sorry, I can't stomach it. And the fact that it happens with my money at the BBC infuriates me every single time I think about it. But I'm glad you brought this up, because this is something that I've very much noticed. I'm a product of the sort of aspiring middle class. So my father was working class, joined the forces. I got a sort of lower middle class upbringing, and then I went to university, and you know, joined the kind of homogenous middle classes. And I'm a bit of a traitor to my own class in this regard, because I don't really find them to be good or moral people, but they do certainly think that way of themselves. And there was always a kind of grudging respect between the classes, as far as I'm aware, growing up. And it was always, maybe it's because I was, you know, my dad was in the military, so it was more laid bare in that regard, because you always have the officers' mess, the sergeant's mess, and then and so maybe that's why I'm more sensitive to it. But since Brexit, in fact, I found the middle classes to become unbelievably insufferable. Like this, we're not wrong, you're racist. That kind of attitude. And that it is very classist. And you see this in insults like gammon. You know, that's a very classist insult. They're never calling, you know, some kid from Eton gammon. You know, it's always some Tommy Robinson supporter who eats fried Mars bars and things like this. You know, these are the gammons. And so there has become I think this is something that is not spoken about, but it is doing probably irreparable harm to the relations between the classes in the country, because the middle class, as you say, they have an outright, not just disdain, but an open hatred of many of these people as being morally deficient. And I'm always just reminded of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like, well, it's easy to say that when you're earning 50 grand a year in your job in London. But when you're earning 15 grand a year, and then you've got various social ills from mass immigration, and you know you're struggling, it's something that you would think they would be a little more just generous about. You know, maybe don't treat the people who are crying out who need help as if they are morally deficient, because I don't think they are.
Well, I mean, I think that's right, and. If you look at the whole thing about calling people far right, far right is very seldom applied to people of a certain class.
That's true.
You know, you reminded me talking about the military that you know, the men often used to refer to their officers as Ruperts.
Yes.
And you know, but I think there's always in the army there's always this sort of real respect that if you were an officer
was the
you
Rupert.
had to go and you had to be as good as your men and better in every respect to make sure that you maintained their respect, and officers went through a lot of training in order to be able to do that. And yeah, I think it's become, I think there is a sort of middle class Remain contingent that you know, are still sneering at the uneducated Leave voter
Yeah.
who gets everything wrong because he's, simply of a lower order.
Didn't go to university, hasn't got a degree. What
that's
does
it.
he know? He can't
That's
possibly
it.
have any knowledge.
That's it. There is big snobbery. I mean, of course, they say about English people that if you put any two Englishmen in a room together, they will immediately set about finding a way to exclude a third. There is, of course, that factor going on.
Yeah.
But that's really got to stop. People, Remainers and people in the establishment and in politics and in media need to start actually listening to and talking to real working class people in this country.
Yes.
They may have tattoos. They may, they may smoke a particular brand of cigarette or whatever it is.
They
but you
may
better
not be
start listening.
cultivated.
Yeah, you better start listening, because if you don't, it's impossible to have the symbiosis we were talking about earlier, where you have successful businesses that have people from all walks of life, some of whom are very educated and very expert and get paid more, and some of whom do more menial jobs. I remember listening to a program about management consultancy. I think it was interviews with people from McKinsey and places like that, and there was an interview with, I think, someone who had been the managing director of Volkswagen, saying that they couldn't understand the existence of this consultancy industry in the UK, because their attitude was, how can someone come in for a short period and understand your business better than you do? If you don't understand your own business, then get out of it, because you're not the right person, you're in the wrong place, get out. And so, yes, that the question of expertise and how you structure a business. Many of those businesses. The reason I brought that program up is because there was an account in the program of a business that put in place a system where anybody could make a suggestion that would be put in front of the managing director, even if your job was to come in at night and sweep up the factory floor.
Yeah.
You could put a suggestion into the suggestions box and make sure and get confirmation that you would get a response from the top level of management of the company to take it seriously. And that's how it needs to be. Companies and industries and businesses need to be a genuinely heterogeneous society, a team of people all on the same side, all recognizing that they depend on each other to succeed commercially, and to earn money and to get on. So yes, that class division is a very, very dangerous thing, and it needs to be overcome, and that needs to be bridged.
But it's easy to say that, but the onus is on the middle class Remainer types to accept the result of the referendum. And that essentially means respecting the will of their inferiors in their mind.
Yes.
And I don't see how that's going to happen. I can't imagine these people are going to suddenly go, well, okay, fair enough, I lost, that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only one way that it could happen is if Brexit is delivered, and it is successful, it turns into a success, and people look back and say, well, basically, the experts got it wrong. The elite got it wrong. The establishment got it wrong. The establishment failed to see that there was a real commercial opportunity for this country as a result of being more agile and being more free and having better self-governance and actually representing ourselves on the world stage. And if that happens, which I fingers crossed, I desperately hope that it will, and that's why one of the main reasons why I keep working in UKIP and fighting for UKIP is that UKIP, one of the great things about UKIP is that it's a party with great unity on this question. It's full of people that do believe or have a hunch that we have a bright future once we've left. And if that happens, then I think hopefully the argument will be settled, and people will have the humility to say, my economic predictions were wrong. And I didn't take into account this or that or the other factor.
They're not going to do it.
Well, it's interesting because you're right that it doesn't happen very often.
No.
But certainly, sometimes you see people. I think there are one or two people who look back at, let's say, the decision not to join the euro. And actually do say mea culpa. I mean, one of my bugbears is that the FT and the communist, as I like to call it, the FT, of course, is pink, and the Economist's headline is red. And I always wonder if those colours are chosen for a reason. But those publications campaigned hard for us to join the euro. I've never seen them actually print an apology to the readership saying, we got it wrong. And we apologise for trying to take this country into a currency that everyone can see has got very serious structural problems. So we'll see. But hopefully, if we keep making progress and we keep at it, it will slowly become clear that the joint endeavour of all kinds of people in this country, whatever background they're from, whatever education they have, whatever their colour their skin is, it doesn't matter, that together as a nation, we have a bright future through our endeavour together.
God, I really hope so, because there are so many Remainers whose face I just want to rub it in at this point.
That's one of the hard things about being a leaver now is 3 years of being humiliated and put down and sworn at and treated like dirt.
We know better than you.
And all of that sort of very patronising attitude. And you've got to be able to forgive. And by and large, I think that amongst the reaction amongst all of the UKIPers that I know and leavers that I know is actually a very calm, rational and patient reaction so far. And I hope that doesn't have to continue for too long and that we actually get out. But, on the other hand, I've seen a lot of reaction, really quite hysterical and childish reaction from people who supported Remain. I've had a dead fish hung from my own door handle as a message, a mafia message. We're coming to get you, and surrounded by EU flags, and the building sort of vandalised, not in any serious way, just sort of rotten eggs thrown at it and stuff. But it does seem to me to be a childish reaction. I think that probably amongst the establishment, elite Remainer contingent, there is, for many people, it may be one of the first times in their life where they haven't got their own way.
Well, now you say that, I think that's probably true. But I think more importantly, though, I would describe it as like the technocratic class of the country. They believe that you need a degree to have expertise in something, and so they think they have scientifically solved a bunch of problems that are not scientific problems. The economy, for example. It's like, well, all the models say this, all the projections say this, therefore this must be the truth. And when the truth is the direct opposite of that, all they can do is go into denial and say, well, you just wait. Brexit's going to fail any day now. The economy's going to collapse any day now, even though there are no real signs of it. So I think that it's kind of bred into them through their education that, knowledge is received wisdom from the top down. It never goes the other way. And I think that they're resisting this kind of push from the bottom, because no, you didn't come up the way I came up, and that's the right way to do it. And I think it's going to turn them even more hysterical than they've been.
Well, we shall see about that. But it's also an interesting point. Economics. I started to do economics A level and gave it up almost immediately because the graphs didn't have units on them, and I did physics instead. There is this spectrum of science, and there are many disciplines that aspire to being scientific, but which aren't really. Karl Popper famously rejected economics pretty much as being pseudoscience, and said that the problem with economic theories is that they never really test them to destruction. When they are proven wrong by what happens, they say, oh, well, that was because of this or that or some other factor, and they don't actually.
Why didn't you factor that in?
They don't actually reject the theory. Of course, it turns out that that's actually what happens in much harder sciences too, and they often don't. So, well, we have dark matter, and now then dark energy, and that still didn't get the experimental data to match theory, and now they're talking about dark flow. So there's, the ad hoc adjustment of theory to suit circumstances is something that happens across all sciences. But certainly, I think in economics, there's often you see appeals to authority. You know, this person is a guru, and therefore what he says is somehow a fact. And we've seen how a lot of economists can be wrong, and we've seen it over and over again. And that very likely is going to continue to happen. One of the reasons for that is that economics is actually supposed to be a science about decisions that human beings are going to make in the future.
Yeah.
And
who wants to make those predictions?
Yeah, right. And human beings are infuriatingly unpredictable creatures, and that's one reason why you have to question whether there can ever be a reliable science of economics.
Well, you'd have to have the zeitgeist of the civilization mapped out very, very accurately, and to know what's coming next as well. You know, if some new cultural force comes in, then surely a lot of money is going to flow that way. Whereas a year back, you couldn't have predicted this.
That's it.
So
that's it. There's a wonderful economic model machine in the Science Museum, which I'm not sure if it was designed and built after the availability of computers, but it's hydraulic. It uses water, and water flows in at the top, and it's got all these mechanisms, and the water sort of goes in all sorts of different directions, and there are knobs and levers that you can turn to change the resistance of one circle of buckets, or the thickness of another pipe, and a tap here, and all of those are supposed to represent economic factors that change over time. And it's a hilarious device because it's necessarily quite crude. The extent to which it can actually predict what happens in the world of the commercial world, the economic world, I don't know. But you look at the machine, and it really is a sort of Heath Robinson marvel. And when I think of economic predictions as they're presented, as they very often are, with this sort of real certainty, sometimes you feel the only thing that a certain economist is lacking when he goes on television is a white lab coat and some protective glasses, in case some economic experiments, go catastrophically wrong, and money starts flying out in all sorts of directions, or limbs, or whatever it is that flies when economic experiments go wrong. So yes, that's right. Expertise. I think part of that problem is that there seems to be less humility. Science, it's one of the failures of science, I think, is that because science has been so successful at producing machinery, technology, our lives have got so much easier, and there have been so many amazing developments in science. There's a sense that people regard science as being sort of indisputably true beyond all doubt, and therefore utterly reliable. And that is a mistake.
I don't think it'd be very well applied to things like human beings, though. That's the problem. If I push one end of a rod, the other end rises. Of course, it's eminently predictable. If I put a product out on the market, maybe people don't want it. Maybe it doesn't resonate with them.
That's right. Well, and look at Veblen. Veblen is I think so often overlooked. The Marxian idea of the value law and so on.
The labour theory of value.
Well, and
obvious nonsense.
Anybody looking at it goes, well, that's just rubbish, isn't it? I mean, that's the beginning, if that's the premise upon which you build this extraordinary structure of political thought, then that's insane. I mean, you're just floating. You're in free fall, basically. But with Veblen, I mean, Veblen's fascinating because you put the price of a product up, and suddenly people are buying more of it. And that goes against almost everything that everybody learns. And the point really is that people are communicating prosperity. They want to show that they've been ripped off. Well, look how ripped off I am. I don't care. I'm happy. I'm being ripped off. I love it.
I read about Head and Shoulders, the shampoo. Now I didn't know anything about this, but it was a very interesting little documentary I read about it, or watched about it, where it didn't cost very much to make, so they put it on the market very cheaply, and people just assumed that because it was cheap, it didn't work.
That's it.
And it didn't sell. And then they doubled the price, and suddenly people started buying it because they assumed there was some confidence in the product.
That's it.
Given the price that it was sold at. And it's one of those things that, as an economist, how do you predict this? You don't know the kind of impression people are going to have.
You can't. I mean, that's a big part of marketing is, to whom are we pitching this product? And how much money do they want to show they have? I remember going to a nightclub in the south of France about, 30 years ago. And I asked for a glass of tap water because I was broke as usual. And and the chap put a glass of tap water on the bar in front of me and said that'll be 15 equivalent of 15 euros.
Francs, yeah.
And I just watched him pour it out of the tap. And I was like, you've got to be joking. He's like, no, I'm not joking. It's 15 euros. Thank you very much. And, I had to pay. What can I do? And at that point, I finally understood the purpose of this nightclub, which was full of sort of incredibly beautiful, rich people.
Yeah.
And, one of the reasons that you go there is to show that you're very happy being massively ripped off because you're so wealthy.
It doesn't matter.
Look how fabulous. I'm not just young and beautiful and beautifully dressed, but I'm that wealthy. So and I do think that if you look at a lot of, one of the reasons that I've given many times for not being so worried about our economy after Brexit is that I think that there is enormous price elasticity. People pay what they pay, but they might pay quite a bit more, or they might pay quite a bit less. And when those adjustments happen, people deal with it. And they adjust. And if they've got a budget for stuff, they rearrange their budget. And they might buy less or more of something else or whatever it is. But there is significant elasticity in prices. And that's why I think if some tariffs are introduced on, let's say, UK products going into mainland Europe, or even if we introduce tariffs on some products coming from Europe and the rest of the world, people will very easily and quickly adjust to that. Yeah. One of the indicators of how elastic prices are is that I read a survey recently that they tested the prices of a lot of products that are sold both to men and women, but in different packaging.
Yeah.
And I think with the razors, simple plastic razors, you had the pink ones in a packet with designed to appeal to women, just around the corner on the shelf from the men's one. Precisely the same razor, but the men's ones were blue or whatever it was. And the price ratio was 4-1. So the women's ones were 4 times as expensive for the same product. And, that's how they're selling them. And there's a whole range of products we found that women are paying a lot more for precisely the same thing. And I'm sure that there are products, of course,
this is actually
where men pay more. Presumably, if you want to buy a supercar, then men are going to pay more than women for a supercar, and that's a big expenditure. But for a lot of simple things like razors, actually, women are getting fleeced. And if they walk around the corner and bought the men's product, which is exactly the same, they'd get it at a quarter of the price. Yeah. But they don't want to. They don't want to.
Well, this is how the patriarchy gets them.
Well, you see, that's it. Yeah. But so that, I think that indicates that there is enormous price elasticity. We know when we buy trainers that you pay 50 or 100 quid for a pair of trainers. We all know perfectly well that it's £2.50 of goods really. Yeah. And we just buy it because it's there and we can. And
well, it's because it's social capital, isn't it? Other people will see. I actually bought some trainers the other day from a shop that I don't normally go to, and I spent like £50 on these trainers, something like that. I wouldn't normally, but I wanted I knew I'd be doing a lot of walking, so I wanted a fairly decent pair of trainers. Normally I get the cheaper ones, and I've had a lot of people compliment me on my trainers, and I'm like, but they're actually awful trainers. Yeah. Like they when it's wet, they're a bit slippery and things like this, and functionally I think they're awful, but apparently I've got social capital.
Nice Glorias. That's it.
Yeah, apparently.
That's it. If you're wearing the right Glorias, everyone wants to be your friend.
That's right.
That's my favourite bit of rhyming slang, by the way, Gloria Gaynors.
Oh, right. That's probably not something anyone around here knows anymore, is it?
No, I don't know where it came from. I can't remember. But no, that's absolutely right. That we do not shop optimally. No. And we waste a lot of money, and there's big elasticity in every, and I think first world, of course, it's much more the case. We live in a Veblen economy. So much of what we buy is grossly overpriced.
And probably unnecessary as well.
Well, and the waste is we're very spoiled. We're very lucky. So that's a reason why I'm not too pessimistic, because I think life, we can ride over if there are any bumps in the road. I think we can ride over them. I think we will do well, no matter what happens.
Just a bit of stiff upper lip and push on through.
Yeah, but also I think there's going to be products that get cheaper.
Yeah.
Products from all over the world.
Yeah. Well, the Irish are currently panicking about beef and cheese because apparently the Argentinians are lining up to sell us these at a much cheaper price than Ireland sells them.
Yeah.
And it's a huge amount of Ireland's domestic economy. It's tens of thousands of tons of beef and cheese that we buy from Ireland every year that we're not going to be buying from Ireland if the EU doesn't give us a deal.
Yeah.
So-
Well, I hope we do really well and we buy as much from Ireland and we increase what we buy from Argentina as well. And when they talk about how the Franco-German coal agreement was about stopping, it was all about stopping war. Well, maybe if we buy more Argentinian beef, then they'll go a bit soft on us
Then
for
they won't invade the Falklands again.
and we'll have, because the UK used to have, I think, a much better relationship with Argentina. And I mean, I can remember when I was young, meeting Argentinian people who really loved the UK and really looked to the UK as a country that they loved, and that war certainly introduced a rift that didn't used to be there.
Yeah.
So there's good relationships to be had all over the world. I mean, I met a guy during the referendum who came from Colombia, and he came up to me because I was dealing with leaflets in my van and so on.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh yes, I support Brexit." And he was actually an engineer, a Colombian engineer who's been here about 8 or 10 years. Came here to work for a British engineering company, and I actually chatted to him and interviewed him. And he was just telling me about the reputation that British products have in Colombia. He was saying, in Colombia, we look at Land Rovers, and we think, the British, they know how to do this. We've got all this jungle, but if you want to get through this jungle, you need a British off-road vehicle because they know how to get that right. Look at these Land Rovers; they go on for years. That you can dismantle them and put them back together again. They're right, and he was saying that generally in Colombia, people have a perception of British products, British companies, as being absolutely top notch. Some of the best in the world. And so it's not just the English-speaking countries that we can have these very good relationships with. It's the whole world.
One thing I found very interesting, I've met a surprising number of people who are foreigners but not Europeans, who are very pro-Brexit. They don't like the way that Europe is governed, and they don't see why it would be a bad thing for Britain to be a sovereign country. And it's quite heartening, really, that we can look to the outside world and they've got a positive view of us.
Yeah.
It's not, we're not hated around the world, which is what the left would have you believe,
I went to a hustings down at Elephant and Castle during the European parliamentary election, and it was organised actually by a sort of Hispanic society. Many people from the South American countries and from Spain and Portugal there, and I was amazed because when there were questions at the end, the first guy who stood up and spoke was Hispanic. I can't remember if he was from Spain or South America. Perhaps from Spain. Yeah. But he spoke incredibly eloquently with a wonderful Spanish accent for 5 minutes, and my job was done. He absolutely got it, and he was saying, don't forget how important democracy is. Yeah. Don't forget that what this country had was a democracy that was an example to the world. Don't forget that in lots of Hispanic or Spanish-speaking countries and Latin American countries, people still aspire to have that level of proper accountable democracy that Britain used to have before it was part of the European Union. And that's why, he said, that's why I, as a Hispanic person who's been living here for many years, I'm absolutely behind leaving because, this country of all countries needs to return to democracy to continue to be that example, that beacon to the world of how you can run for hundreds of years a functioning democracy that makes good decisions, that gets on in the world and that prospers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was bloody inspirational, huh?